We can replace 100% of the fossil fuel in this state within 10 years or less at a cost less than we're currently paying to maintain the old system. And the operating costs will be less too. So it's a no-brainer.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Climate Confident podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Rinaldo. Rinaldo, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm not sure which part of my very checkered past is most interesting in the introduction, as I've been the founder and CEO of the World Business Academy since 1985. And in that capacity, we've worked on all the various issues that I think are of interest to you, publishing a tremendous number of books I've written for myself. Their associates have written many more. I've written 45 major articles, 150 1,000-word op-ed pieces that were published weekly in the local Montecito Journal. And I'm fascinated by what business can do to change society for the better. I became, in 1985, hopelessly concerned that the political institutions were not capable to the times, were not capable of withstanding the pressure of the times. And that's true of academic and religious institutions as well, which is why you've seen them all unravel over the last decade or so. We saw that coming, and we said the only thing we can do is get business community to realize it's really bad for their markets when countries go broke. It's really bad for everybody but arms suppliers when countries vastly include their military budgets, which is happening now. And I'm reminded of that great quote by Eisenhower. Every bomb, paraphrasing it, is, who do you steal from a hungry mouth? Every ship could be several high schools, etc. I'm reminded of the fact that the business community has two things that are what it does really well that address the issues of our time. Number one, we change well. Business, the modus operandus is change or die. So if you don't change, the marketplace will get you. So because we learn that, we adapt to change very well. The number one challenge, I would say, facing society that has created all the awful things like climate change and inequality and you name it, starvation, famine around the world, all of that stems from our inability to deal with the speed of change, not change. Change has been here since the time of Heraclitus, the Greeks. He said famously, you never step twice in the same river, because by the time you step in it, it's a new river. Well, that speed of change is what's been troubling people, and they're feeling more and more lost. The second thing is that business realizes it commands massive international resources in a way that almost no other institution can. So when it links its own economic future with the well-being of the countries that it is arising from, business will turn, and when it does, things change.
And tell me a little bit about the World Business Academy. What's the function?
Sure.
You said it was set up in 85. Who are the members? What do you do?
Yeah. So we're a 501c3 tax-exempt organization. We started out primarily as a think tank, which we still are. But then a number of the things that we wrote about just did not get enough attention, and the needle didn't move. So then we threw ourselves into that particular fray, and we called ourselves at that point a think and do tank, because if no one else will do, we'll think and do. And to that extent, we've got into quite a few number of really interesting things. So here in California, the San Onofre nuclear power plant has been closed permanently, which was a direct result of the participation of the Academy. And some other people helped, but basically we were able to prove what went wrong there and how much crime had been committed, which now has been admitted, the crimes were committed, and it's permanently closed. But as business people, we go, okay, so what do you do about the unintended consequence of that closure? Like we have all these cooling ponds full of high-grade nuclear waste sitting on the shores of California, where a single 182 Cessna could do a dive bomb, catch fire, and you would radiate certainly 1 million people. Could be more because that's in the middle of Orange County. It depends on where the wind's blowing, because if it's blowing south, you can do San Diego County. So checking out the full system is what business does well. In other words, business doesn't just look at what does it cost to make it. They go, what does it cost to make it? What does it cost to sell it? What does it cost to ultimately bury it? This full cycle thinking, only business does that. Academia does not do it, although they do some interesting things. Let me just quickly point out the contrast to academia, because I'm an academic and I love to write and I love to publish. And what I know is that the world of academia, and I've had the good fortune of teaching at the best business schools in the world. So I guess lecture at Stanford, Keenan Flagler, at my favorite, Kellogg, I shouldn't say a favorite, but I have a favorite, Case Western, Barcelona. All of these great business schools are all struggling with the same question. How do they prepare people to deal with the world that's changing so fast that nobody thinks in terms of careers anymore? They think in terms of, okay, where do I start? Then where do I go? And they don't think about, what can I get into that will be good for the rest of my life? Because they know that isn't going to happen. The rest of their life is going to flash by in less than 10 years, and there's going to be a new life there. So what we do in the academy is we try to give the business community the tools it needs, both at the education level and at the level of individual financial well-being. We tell people how to make more money doing the right thing. So I think you're familiar with the spinoff we did about 12 years ago called Just Capital. And what we've been proving conclusively in the marketplace every year are companies that we pick and research, because we research the 1,000 largest public companies in America every year. And we have about 650 of them that participate in our data analytics and looking at what we do. We rank them. And our partner in that originally was Forbes magazine. I picked them because they were the most conservative magazine for business. And I wanted a conservative stamp on this, that this was not a progressive agenda. This was a business objective. We did the same thing when we switched over to CNBC, who's our principal sponsor now. So we supply a tremendous amount of on-air time and talent, and we report back what we found about these companies that seem to have a broader interest in how to make money, and they're outperforming their peers. We call that broader interest stakeholder capitalism. So I started writing about that probably 15, 20 years ago. And the idea was to get the CEOs particularly, but the companies, to realize that if they treat all of their stakeholders well, they will actually make more money for their shareholders and themselves. So then we formed an ETF to prove the point. I was successful. We got Goldman Sachs to manage that ETF for us. Now, why did we pick Goldman? Because Goldman is notorious for 120 years of doing nothing that doesn't make money. So they don't have a green bone in their body. If it doesn't make money, it doesn't matter whether it's green or gray. They're gonna go with it. It took us a while, about a year, to sell them on the principle. They put the ETF together, and we actually got $1 million from Partners Capital to launch it. And every year for the last, I think it's now been out there for 8 years, we outperform the Russell significantly. So we outperform them each year, and we outperform them over the entire, I guess it's been now 8 years we've been doing it. Why? Because it's a simple thing. If you are smart enough to know that you have to take care of your employees, you have to take care of your customers, you have to take care of your vendors, and of course you can take care of your shareholders, and you got to take care of the biosphere and the communities where you live. If you understand that, guess what? Your shareholders do better. And that's what we've proved. We've proved it year after year. And so our companies always outperform in good times and bad, the comparative index, which is the Russell 2000. That's an example of what we do for business. We try to show them where the win is by doing what makes sense for society. For example, in the case I just gave you of stakeholder capitalism, the reason I got caught up in that many years ago was Milton Friedman, head of the Chicago School, Reagan's favorite economist, basically said in 1972, the only legitimate purpose of business is to make money for the shareholders. And that became labeled the shareholder supremacy doctrine. And until we came along, everybody assumed it was true. And we said, wait a minute, no, it actually works better for your shareholders. You do not operate in isolation from society. So you need to start getting responsible. And I'm going to tell you one really great story. So Ray Anderson, good friend of mine, you were asking who the members of the Academy. Ray was until the day he died. Ray was making carpets down in Georgia. And he got inspired to want to end the huge amount of carpets putting into the landfills every year, because he found out that the number one contributor to landfills at that time was carpets. So he said, well, what can I do? And he noticed that the hall in his building was threadbare in the middle, but the carpets on the side were just fine. So he invented carpet tiles. Now, no need to tell you, his company then went on to make gazooks full of money. But he did that not because he was trying to make more money. He did that because he was trying to be more sustainable. And so what Ray did is he learned you can do the right thing for the right reason. Oh, and it can make more money too. Now, it doesn't always have to. Sometimes the rewards you get that are non-monetary actually can exceed the monetary ones. And that goes into your paycheck too, one way or the other. It goes in terms of, for example, our CEOs have a longer longevity than normal CEOs. They last longer.
Right.
Which, when you consider that the Fortune 500 probably turns the CEOs on average, what, every 3.5 years?
Yeah.
Guys will be there for decades. I mean, Ray was there till he died. So you ask, who are the members of the Academy? Well, they're people in business who want to see this broader view, want to understand how to connect it, and then how to actually have their own companies prosper. I just started, Tom, and I urge you to listen to it. If you want a link, let us know. I just started doing a thing for the members about 4 months ago called the Brutoco briefing, because I was getting so many calls from business people. What do I do in the face of what's coming? I mean, it looks like we're going to get into a heck of a recession. And several of them had heard me say on air, yeah, the recession's baked in. I mean, if you unravel all the tariffs tomorrow morning, it's too late. You got a recession coming. You definitely have inflation already. Oh, and guess what? You have a reduction of GDP. Last time we had that was called stagflation. Okay? When you have a reduction of economic activity, but inflation increasing. That's what we're heading into now. First phases of it are here. It's going to get far worse. And the longer these tariffs stick around, the worse it will get. Now, what will be the outcome of that? Will be entire businesses will be crushed. The economy is going to go into a serious recession, probably global. It'll probably drag the rest of the world down with it for a while. Oh, and here's the most important thing. We've now broken a pattern of 80 years of American dominance on the international scene, and we're now going to be one of several poles that hold up the global order. Another pole is called Europe. There's 320 million people there. It's an enormous economy. The euro is now very strong against the dollar. It's strengthened in ways that people saw coming, including me. It will not continue to strengthen against the dollar, but it's not going to come back that far. Swiss francs have gone up against the dollar and will stay there, as an example. So we talk about these things on the Brutoco briefing. And we talk about where are the places that inflation is going to bite you the hardest, where are the places that the business will be most severely impacted. Then we talk about the political choices people make. And what I try to make clear to folks is I haven't belonged to a political party in 35 years. When I started the Academy, I dropped out of political parties, and I've been an independent ever since. Now, the largest political party in America at this point is the Independent Party. We outnumber the Democrats and the Republicans combined, and we're growing. They're not. Why? Because we've gotten to the point where doctrinaire politics doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve the people they think it serves, and it certainly doesn't serve the rest of us. I'll make one last point. Business can get very short-sighted about short-term profits, and we try to talk about that a lot. That there's that old saying, don't eat your seed corn. And what we try to tell people is, if you try to maximize your profit to the point where it hurts your consumer base, i.e. gouging, you will end up with fewer profits in the long run, and you'll end up with corporate instability. Nothing I just said is novel. Nothing I just said is new. But what's different is that the members of the Academy believe not only that it's true, but we're actively doing something to change it. And we are assisted, if you go on our website, which is worldbusiness.org, we're assisted by a group of extremely interesting fellows who have, I always like to say, they're the yeast that leavens the bread. Business people are the bread, we're the flour. Without those fellows writing and stirring us, we wouldn't be where we are. In fact, one of our associate members is the woman who first coined the term, well, brought it to the West, it was already a term, Ubuntu. I remember we published that first article on Ubuntu, got to be about 18, 20 years ago. And people go, well, why would I care what they're doing in darkest Africa? What does Ubuntu mean to me? I go, well, actually, if you think about it, it could be a lot, because it's a different form of collegiality. And so when you see that the old forms of power aggregation are beginning to dissipate, you see the Kenretsu are not as powerful as they used to be. And you can clearly see what's going on in South Korea, where the cabals are not. Yeah. Okay. So these breakdowns have to happen because they came up in a colonial era. And now we live in this global marketplace. And we also have this one other problem that no one seems to want to deal with. And business has to. And that is, we just have way too many environmental refugees, millions of them. And we have economic refugees. And they're destabilizing the political West. So if you don't think you need to get involved, watch what happens to your country when it goes the way of some of the ones that we've seen most recently. Take Orban, for example, who claims to be a capital country. He isn't. He's an authoritarian. The economy of Hungary continues to plummet. It's in terrible shape and getting worse by the day. Well, unless you're making bombs, you don't do well in that economy. And as the last time I checked, only like 2% of us make bombs. 98% of us make Twinkies, or the equivalent, right? So we need stable markets. And in order to help stabilize them, we need to help society understand where its true stakeholder values are. Not it's like, can I get you a flashier car because the Jones have one? But what can I do to help you have a transportation system that doesn't destroy the atmosphere so your children will be alive in 50 years instead of victims of climate change? And that's what we do. And because business, and that's the second thing, of course, is we're so good at calculating outcomes. We're really good at that. We look at each stage of each phase. Academia doesn't do that. Academia is looking backwards over time and projecting that knowledge of what we out into the future. That system breaks down in periods of rapid change. I would stipulate, I would think you would agree, we are living in a place today of extraordinary rapid change, of accelerating rapid change. We're not looking anymore at like arithmetic progression. We're looking at geometric progression. 2 plus 2 is 4 versus 2 times 2 is 4 times 4 is 16 times 6, etc. That's where we live. Now, we can't change that for a whole bunch of reasons, but we have to adapt to it or it will be our undoing. People can begin to see, I think you know, Tom, I hold some really basic patents in artificial intelligence and what's called Gen AI. And the way I got into that was, well, first of all, I've been in AI since 1985 because my first guy that joined the academy was Willis Harman, and Willis invented AI, taught it as a course at Stanford University in the electrical engineering department, and got pulled out of there. And they made him futurist in residence for 16 years of SRI because they said, this guy's seeing the future. Well, my partner, Willis, when he joined me, started telling about this thing called AI in the engineering department. And I went, wow, Willis, that's way bigger than the engineering department. No wonder they pulled you out of there. And I've been playing with it ever since. When Gen AI came along, and I saw that it was affecting our communications, how we talk to each other, what we think we say to each other. It was affecting the veracity, the truthfulness of our communications. ChatGPT hallucinates. So does Grok. Okay? So how do you live in a world where this amount of data is being thrown at you and you've got a machine talking back to you and it's off base? Well, the answer is you can't live by that machine alone. You have to put systems around it that cross-check that machine. So let me give you an example. The CEO of NVIDIA, the most successful company in the world, uses AI the same way I learned this the other day. When I do research, like I'm right now, I'm doing a major article on geothermal because geothermal is becoming a very new topic, hot topic. I've been involved with it for more than a decade. And right now it's time and the sun has come for reasons I can explain. When I write that article, I don't use ChatGPT. I go do my own research and I figure out what the answers are as a research scientist. And then when I get done and I write the article, I run it through ChatGPT and say, make it sound like me. In other words, make sure all the nouns, the pronouns, all that comes out like my voice. It comes back to me. And I do a final edit just in case it hallucinated. Mm-hmm. And then I release it. I'd never trust, and no one should, ChatGPT for original research. Or Grok. Yeah. Grok's worse, actually. But, they're both troublesome. Okay, so that's an example of an individual, me, putting a safety system around a great technology, which it is, and using it to leverage what I do rather than getting lazy and defaulting and let it do it for me, and then it doesn't work well at all. Why did I do that? Because I'm a business guy. What do business people we look for process and systems controls. We constantly are looking for how to manufacture things more inexpensively and better. I urge everybody of your listeners to think through, whether they're in business or not, if you look at the challenges we are facing with a pragmatic lens, and I'd like to think business is pragmatic in the end, what you will see is information that is all over the place that you weren't paying attention to because you were getting distracted by what I call the shiny bauble syndrome. So I'll give you a priceless example. This has nothing to do with the politics of Republicans. It has to do with an incident. So Doge, which I don't even believe it was a legal exercise. I think when we have a new Supreme Court one day, they will overturn all these silly decisions where, the president is a new king and all that. But when Doge went in there and all those people got fired, everybody looked at that as the story. That wasn't the story. That's not what Doge was about. Doge was about sucking up data.
Mhm.
He sent young guys with hard drives in, first clue. And their job was to grab every particle of data he could. And he didn't care what happened to the people. He just got rid of them because that made it look like that's what they were doing. But what they were really doing is grabbing all that data. And who ended up with all that data? None other than the partner, I would say, over the last 30 years of Elon Musk. Palantir ended up with it. Okay. So, and with a contract to boot to build the largest AI database in the world, which it's now going to start doing. That's scary. That's very scary because Palantir is run by some people who you would not want to trust with your child's life. Put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I say it because not all business people are good people. Right. In fact, the majority probably aren't.
Fair.
The smart ones are.
You mentioned geothermal, and this is the Climate Confident podcast where we try and talk about emissions reduction strategies and stories. So you said that geothermal is, coming for its time in the sun, as it were.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, the company that's sort of like leading that industry now, the American company, decided to use oil patch technology. So rather than using the technology that powered the China Lake geothermal project since the early 70s, probably late 60s. We don't know when it started because it was a high security. China Lake is a place in California where they were doing advanced weapons research and they didn't want anybody to see that they were there.
Mm.
So what they did is they didn't want any electrical wires going in. Oops. And when they did that, because they didn't want the electrical wires going in, they had to develop a new technology. And what they developed was geothermal. And the type of geothermal they invented was where you inject water, you don't find it there, into a cavern, and you have a retrieval well on the other side, and it sucks the hot water up, creates steam. And I've known of that for many, many years. So when I was the principal outside advisor to the state of Hawaii for renewable energy a number of years ago, one of the things they asked me to look at was Puna geothermal, how it was doing, was it charging fair prices, was it going to run out of steam, et cetera. And in that process, I learned a tremendous amount. And that particular plant is run by the most successful geothermal operators in the world, the Ormat family, which literally started out as a husband, a wife, and a son, who were steam pipe fitters in Israel. And they now have Ormat facilities all over the world. Well, they realized instead of using the oil patch model, that there was a better model that was more sustainable, would last longer, and do less damage. And it's just slightly more expensive, but not a lot. Well, the companies getting into geothermal today, based in part upon the favorable treatment they are still getting under Trump. So one of the few renewable energies that get favorable treatment is geothermal. Why? Because what they're using is slant drilling perfected in the oil industry. So you've got the same suppliers, Baker Hughes, doing the oil field services, only now they're doing geothermal services. You've got the technology of slant drilling. So, and what they do, and this is very visual, they're looking for 2 layers of hot rock and they're threading through it, basically a pipe. And their theory is that way they can capture the heat from both the top and the bottom, and that well will last longer. Now, we can talk a little bit about what causes wells to die, et cetera. But that technique will not provide the kind of heat that's been generated at China Lake since the early 70s and is still continuing to produce at enormous rates and does not use slant drilling. But it didn't have the right allies. So the oil companies got involved in geothermal. And once they got involved, the Trump administration decided to give it favorable treatment over other things because there's very few things that the oil industry is involved, which is renewable. Geothermal is one of them. And they love the drilling, just like drilling holes for oil. They love slant drilling, that's just like fracking. They love the retrieval process. And so from their point of view, we're not drilling for oil, we're drilling for hot water. Now I can tell you the drawbacks to that, but that's really why it's become so prominent. And now the economics are becoming very prominent because they're not only getting advantages that other renewable energy sources don't have, investment tax credits, et cetera. They are also in a situation where they are able to use a lot of resources and produce volumes of heat at scale in the megawatts, many, many megawatts, the gigawatt scale, probably eventually. That's attractive to them. Now, their technique, by the way, which I don't approve of, is they can drill to any depths, and they like to brag about how they've revised their drill bits from the oil field, and the diamond-headed drill bits, which are the big thing in the oil field, are now the only thing they use in geothermal. And they like to talk about they can go down to 12,000 feet and pull hot water out of there. Well, what the Ormats do is they go to a lot less shallow distances, and they pull up the heat through less dirt. So if you're going down 2,000 feet and you got to get hot water to the surface, that's one problem. You got to go down 12,000 feet. It's a whole other problem. So it introduces additional costs, but it does give you additional benefits, i.e., you're closer to the magma of the earth. You're never going to expire. And up comes all this heat. I believe the better geothermal approach is the one that is not now as popular, but the Ormats are still using it. And I think the one that's become popular with the Trump administration is not as viable from an environmental point of view, but it is economic as the dickens. That's why it's coming back.
Yeah, okay.
The Ormats build theirs with conventional capital, and they're invested in like 30 countries. It's only 20. And new guys, they're in one country, the USA, and they're getting tremendous support from the oil industry, from oil field services like Baker Hughes, from the government, Trump administration, et cetera.
Okay, and you're a big proponent as well of distributed microgrids. What's the core problem with today's centralized grid that you think microgrids can solve?
Okay, where to begin? Start with, how did the grid start? There was a dispute in the 1880s. On one side was a very famous, well-known inventor named Thomas Edison. On the other side was a very famous physicist of the day and a businessman. The physicist was Nikola Tesla. The businessman was George Westinghouse. Mm-hmm. They had a fight. And what they wanted to take Manhattan back from Edison, who, as you recall, his labs were in New Jersey. So he worked a lot in Manhattan. So he had already built 4 or 5 micro stations. And his theory was, if you build them close enough to where the energy is used, you can use direct current. And direct current is much more efficient than AC or alternating current. Tesla's argument was, look, why don't we build one that's really, really big, extremely economic because of size, and we'll put it someplace like Brooklyn where no one lives. Literally, that's what he said. We'll put it in Brooklyn because no one lives there. Because who cares what we put there? We'll just put a big monster plant there, and we'll bring it over high-powered lines using alternating current, or AC, at high power rates. No one ever stopped to re-examine if that was a good theory at some point in time. And like all technologies, things happen which causes what was a brilliant technology yesterday to be less than a brilliant technology today. So we built these high tension wires all over the world. We sustain enormous line losses. We also sustain an enormous loss from the AC itself because we got to step it up to AC. Oh, and guess what? You got to step it down if you want to plug into it. Your computer cannot plug into AC. It can only do DC. Okay? Your TV has to convert AC to DC. Have you ever been in a recreational vehicle in your life?
Yep.
Okay. Every appliance on it is DC. If you've been in a boat, it's always DC. Why? Because when you're close to the source of production of the energy, the amount of energy you need is a fraction of what you need if it's AC. Okay? But no one ever stopped and examined that. And the money was all behind AC because that's how George Westinghouse, you get an inventor, Westinghouse with a business guy, and you get an inventor without the business guy, Edison. Who's going to win? Come on. The business guy's going to win, whether it's the right technology or not. And he did, and it's kind of amazing that he beat a guy as famous as Edison, but he did. Now, what's happened in the last 30 years is we are not only troubled because our science tells us about line loss. We're not only troubled about the inefficiency of AC. We now realize that if we could create the power where it is used, that's it, like a microgrid, you could create far less power to run society just as well or better. And if you wanted, you can convert it to DC, but you don't have to. you could leave it at AC. I'll come back to that in a moment. It's just to use the AC at the local level because I don't want to have to destroy every distribution line in the country. But all those incoming high-powered lines, what are they doing? Well, in the state of California, 83% of our forest fires come from those lines, and it can't be stopped. Nothing you can do, but they're in the backcountry. Winds come up, high temperatures, they slap, you get a spark, the rest is history. Okay, that's why we have forest fires in California. Okay, yeah. The other thing you can't do with it is we've now had this year at least 10 or 11 power shutoffs because the grid gets overstressed. Now that was before we had electric cars. That's before we put all the demands for electricity that are growing every day on the web, which was already breaking down before. And in California, we are living under two pieces of paper that were filed with the PUC that say the grid in California, where I live, is going to fall down and not be reparable in less than 4 to 6 months, which means we'll be without power. And that's on file with the PUC as the official statement of the electric company. So it's not something that an environmentalist alleged. Okay?
Yeah.
What happens now when you add electric cars? Better yet, what happens when you want to add a data center? Well, data centers for the last 4 years don't use grid power because they can't afford to. They have to be 100% resilient. They have to have no noise. They have to have no line loss. They have to just go. The same thing is true, by the way, with Bitcoin mining or the like. So these massive power consumptions, artificial intelligence, Bitcoin mining, are putting enormous strains on our ability to generate electricity. And those people, where the money to get your own power source isn't stopping them, they're going, wait a minute, we're going to do a fuel cell supported server farm because the fuel cell is 100% constant, resilient, and reliable. And if you're going to use a fuel cell, you use hydrogen. Okay, so a hydrogen supported fuel cell is always going to be your most stable long-term source of power if you're the smartest guy in the world, like the people that run AI. So what's keeping the rest of us dummies from understanding that? Well, capital formation basically resists technological innovation. So inertia. But if you were to take and construct, and we've designed them in the academy, many, many different ones, different times, we designed one for 350,000 households that clearly works. When we designed it, we identified where every single solar panel went to create that 350,000. It wasn't like we said, theoretically, we could put that many solar panels. We went and got the locations and put them on a map so they could see it. This is how you take away a peaker plant, which, by the way, succeeded eventually because the peaker plants closed. We, the Academy, took a major role in closing the last 2 peaker plants in California, and we will oppose any peaker plant that comes forward in the future. Now, we don't like to because we're a think tank, but we're also business guys. So if we think of something and the government is way off base, we will go, okay, we'll go lead that charge. We'll go investigate. Why did that power plant blow up? Who did what to whom? Who's guilty? And what do we want to avoid happening in the future? And what was the risk we had that we never knew we had that caused something to go and irradiate, basically a cloud of radiation that went up over about 2 million people in a matter of less than 15 seconds? How do you do that? Well, you've got to start with what makes more sense in the beginning. So if you can produce, as we can in Santa Barbara, California, solar power, we don't have a lot of wind, we have solar, for, I'm going to say roughly 3 cents per kilowatt. That's not even, and that's without you giving me wind offshore, which we could do, but forget that for a minute. So 3 cents a kilowatt. If you can make electricity for 3 cents a kilowatt in a microgrid, that kilowatt is 1 kilowatt you did not have to take off the grid. So what do we recommend? Our research says you should do what the smart guys in AI did. You put a fuel cell, which is what uses hydrogen, at the base of every one of our 3,300 substations. So you start generating power at the substation level. This is what I said I'd get back to. And now you can send that power without adjustments straight down the line. So now it goes into my house. So you leave Edison, in this case, with the distribution of electricity to the home, which is the big business. But you start to pull more and more of the power from the sun locally so you can take less and less from the grid. And if the grid goes down, you won't care. But here's the beauty of that idea. It never requires a day where you switch the old system off and a new system on. You incrementally replace it. That's what we do in business. And we think, okay, what's the most economic way to make this shift? It's not to build an entire system of microgrids and then on day one, flip the switch. No, put one microgrid at the base of one substation And you've already reduced the demand on the grid. Keep doing it, and you'll never have power shutoffs. And the grid will go away because it's a very inefficient mechanism. They can't produce and sell the electricity as cheaply as we can make it here in Santa Barbara for Santa Barbara. So if I can make electricity, which we can at 4 cents a kilowatt, and I'm paying 39 cents a kilowatt to the Edison company, I got a lot of margin as a businessman to work with. I've made whole businesses and industries with thinner margins than that. Right? That's a good margin.
Sure.
So we can do it. The question is, we don't do it. Why? Because politics. So that's where business has to get in with its political cloud. Say, wait a minute, we're paying for the electricity. We're also paying when we get a shut off, and Lord knows we pay with fires. And we got to stop all this. This is insane. So continuing to do the same thing we invented in 1880 in Manhattan is not a smart idea. What's the new idea that doesn't have forest fires, that's cheaper to build, cheaper to run, and can be an instant reduction of our capacity demands? Oh, and by the way, if you do want to replace those local lines, I do it with DC, not AC. And then you can further drop the power consumption. That's the story. Now, if you want to see how that can be applied to the largest state in the country, fifth largest economy, go to worldbusiness.org and look up our moonshot. I think it's called California Moonshot, which I think I did 10 years ago. Well, no, maybe 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it lays it all out. So, because we've been working on microgrids for about 15 years now. And what's happening is people are starting to understand why they work. And all this invested power that we've given the utilities, which gives them enormous political power, is going to break down. It has to break down. The cost to society is too high. And sooner or later, the people of the state will tell their politicians, I'm tired of my power going off. Fix it. I'm tired of forest fires. Stop it. Oh, there's a way to do that that's actually cheaper. And I'll make a statement for the record. We can replace 100% of the fossil fuel in this state within 10 years or less at a cost less than we're currently paying to maintain the old system. And the operating costs will be less too. So it's a no-brainer. But capital, when it gets locked in, creates political outcomes. No one, we in our country, United States of America, we think corruption's a bad thing, except we encourage it when it's called lobbying. Do you really think, as the average citizen, you have the same vote back in D.C. as the lobbies? Of course not. Citizen action is required when politics gets bogged down in too much money and too much self-interest. And that's where we are. So now we got to change it. And I believe the business people will be the first to react to that, just as the bond market was the first to react to the insanity of firing the Fed chair. The bond and the stock markets reacted to the insanity of firing the head of the BLS. That's just completely crazy. Mm-hmm. And we could go on and on.
Yeah. In terms of the fuel cells, 95% of the hydrogen in the world today is essentially a fossil fuel. It's just steam reforming methane.
Right, that's right.
So,
and by the way, it's almost all of it is created by refineries for their own use.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, not exactly climate friendly.
No.
So, how do we shift that to green hydrogen at the scale that would be required for what you're talking about?
Well, I want to start with one basic fact. We have this incredible nuclear fusion reactor in the sky called the sun. Mm-hmm. It produces enough power in about a minute that 1,000 square miles will power the country indefinitely if you can capture it all. The power of the sun is massive. It's not just solar, and it's not just wind. It's all the ways the sun affects the earth. So if you've got this huge source of energy, and that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck's distribution. So how do you get to green? Well, it's very simple. You have to break through the monopolies and the shared oligopolies that are blocking it. When you talk about green hydrogen, which is going to be the fuel of the future, I mean, when Saudi Arabia comes out and says our export fuel of the future will be green hydrogen, they've said that in writing. The oil companies said that. The United Arab Emirates has said the same thing in writing in a report that was done for them by Boston Consulting 3 years ago. We know we have to be the exporter of green hydrogen. So the world's going to go to green hydrogen. What is holding it back is the heart of your question. And I gave you the word a minute ago. It's distribution. Right now, there is no way to distribute hydrogen economically. So if you want to distribute methane, no problem. Call SoCal Gas, they're moving it all over the place, right? Largest utility in the world, gas utility, because they have pipes.
Yeah.
Okay. And because they have pipes, they can move it very cheaply to anywhere you want it, including your house. Well, we don't have a way to move hydrogen inexpensively, and we don't have a way to capture it, therefore. So let's say you make green hydrogen. How do you get it to the customer of green hydrogen? You have to have a connection. And that connection is going to be for short distances, meaning up to 500 miles or so. It's going to be pipes. And it's going to be pipes that don't leak. That's key. We never put a criterion on methane, that it can't leak. So we didn't realize what methane leakage would do to the planet. Well, with hydrogen, we're addressing that up front. And we're saying we need a pipeline distribution network, which we know can be paid for by private capital, once it's clear that the politicians will let it happen. And that has to be a leak-proof system, because we're going to replace methane with hydrogen, which is what we're going to do. And we're not going to do it through the same pipes. We have to have a separate pipe, because you can't put green hydrogen through a methane pipe even after it stopped being used, because it ceases to be pure enough to work in a fuel cell.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to do, what we clearly need to do, is to create, I call it a barbell. There are plenty of people who want to make hydrogen, and there are plenty of places to make it. Let me give you an example. Morocco. Morocco has wind and sun. It can make it cheaper than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's already got one plant built, second plant under construction, 8 more plant. Emirates have got one plant designed, ready to go to construction. You've got Morocco has got one plant already under construction. When you have a place that has wind and sun, you really get a lot of hydrogen cheap. But you can actually get it just cheap enough from sun if you want. Now, there is a small utility in Northern California that's making green hydrogen with the excess electricity from its microgrid that it's not using during the day. And that hydrogen is now for sale. And they're selling it. Get this, their cost to produce the hydrogen is $4.50 a kilogram. Now, to put that in context, methane from a refinery is cheaper at $1.50 a kilogram. Mm-hmm. And I pay $36 a kilogram for my car. Now, let me repeat that. It's made for $1.50 a kilogram. I'm paying 36. Mm. There is no conceivable way in a free marketplace that can happen. That has to be a monopoly. Because if it's not a monopoly, you'd be charging the $4.50 they're charging up in Northern California. But the problem is, the Northern California guys, they can only get it like the distance of one truck ride. So they're limited by how much they can produce, by who they can sell to. Mm-hmm. But if you live within that one truck ride, are you getting cheap hydrogen? And I'm paying $36 a kilogram. When I started driving my hydrogen cars 6 years ago, the cost was $12 a kilogram. No, it was 10 or 11, and then it went to 12. Today it's 36. Did the cost to make it go up? No, actually went down. Is it green? No, it's methane reformed. What's doing it? Basically, illegal competition. Violations of the Sherman and the Clayton Act happening rapidly and rampantly and obviously. Mm-hmm. And no one's doing anything about it, including the Attorney General of the State of California, which has identical statutes to the Clayton and the Sherman Antitrust Acts. So what the moral of the story is, hydrogen is here, and I want to leave with a very optimistic thought, because you deal with these energy forms.
Great.
Victor Hugo, very famous French author, said, nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. Well, hydrogen's time has come. It's a matter of actually survival for Western civilization to get off of fossil fuel. And as much as the current administration in Washington chooses to ignore that, and the oil companies that they favor continue to operate recklessly, intentionally trying to extract the last drop before they're forced to change, not caring about the fact that their children will be victims of this as well as their grandchildren, which, by the way, is very much like the cigarette companies. Think of all the executives of the cigarette companies who didn't care that kids were being addicted and they had kids. Mm. Okay? And the analogy is pretty strong, because the most illegitimate business I can think of in history was the cigarette business, because its business was to addict people to the point of death. That's pretty strong. I would say a business that does that is an illegitimate business. I would say that's basically a criminal enterprise, because you're killing people. Yeah. And you know that's the purpose of your product. is that statistically you're going to kill people. And you know it's going to drive up hospital costs and medical costs for everybody else. And you don't care because you're just selling cigarettes. Okay. Well, the fossil fuel industry is in the same place today. They don't care that our biosphere is becoming non-survivable. And you don't have to ask the 123 people, mostly kids who died in Texas, the floods. And you don't have to ask the people in North Carolina. You don't have to ask the people all over the country. The East Coast got flooded. Where are you right now talking from, Tom?
Spain.
Spain. Okay, good. Well, lucky you. Because Spain, of all the countries in Europe, is the most advanced country in Europe on hydrogen. And you're going to continue to see really good advancements in Spain. Germany's the second now. France used to be the leader. It's a laggard at the third place, but it is still in the game. All of them are light years beyond the Americans in what they're getting done. And so you're going to see some wonderful projects put together. In fact, the Scots are putting one together right now with the Germans. The Canadians have already signed a deal for Nova Scotia to ship green hydrogen to Germany, and they can't figure out how to get it there, which is, they should have figured that out first, but we have a solution for that, which we've written about. But they will now find that out. And so they're scrambling to figure out, can they turn it into LOHC, et cetera? And if they do, what are they going to use it for? Because then you can't use it in a fuel cell. And if you burn hydrogen, which for some applications is a good thing, for example, you heard the term hard to abate sectors?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's primarily cement and steel.
Yeah.
And the only way you can produce coke-fired furnaces in those two industries is to use hydrogen because the temperature of the flame. Now, I'm not a big fan of that in the sense that you do create some nitrous oxides, but you create so much less pollution with a hydrogen melting process than you do with coal and coke that it's to survive, you got to switch to a better technology.
Yeah.
We are in a non-survivable mode right now. And what's frightening to me, and what I write a lot about, is we're farther past the tipping point than people know. So don't think that you're going to have mild consequences in the year 2300. By 2050, people are going to be screaming for survival in Western civilization. So, will we have the capability to develop the technologies to fruition when we're strapped, we're hanging onto a boat or to a piece of wood because our boat just blew up? We're fighting for survival in the ocean. We're hanging onto a board. How are we going to build the future? And that's the position we're putting ourselves. And that's why it's a tipping point. You get past a certain point, very hard to turn it back around. I spoke to the people that advised Modi just before he got elected the first time, and I said, what you want to do is forget trying to get a power line to the villages. It'll never happen in a million years. It's too expensive, can't be maintained, et cetera. Put a microgrid in. When you put in a microgrid in, all you got to do is get some hydrogen. When you do that, they not only get electricity, they get water, lots of water. So all of a sudden that solves two problems. And it's so easy to make hydrogen. So now you're seeing his number one financial, by the way, he took the advice. They built 10 microgrids in India about 10 years ago now. They're working beautifully. And the largest financial backer of Modi and his principal buddy all these years is building a massive green hydrogen plant in Gujarat, which is the city Modi comes from. Massive. In fact, they contacted his chief engineer contacted me more than a year ago, asking me to calculate the transportation numbers for how they could get their green hydrogen to 4 ports on the east coast of Africa. So we're keeping track of that. And by the way, you can read about it. It's no secret.
Okay, super.
And Tom, if we hang up, I'll send you the link to that town in Northern California making $4.50 kilogram hydrogen. And if you want, we can send you links to other things. Because as part of a research institute, one of the things we do, like I just explained what geothermal is, we dive back in to a subject we've covered before. We haven't been here for a few years. What's happened? How has it changed? What's still relevant? What isn't? For the most part, what we wrote in our book in 2007, Freedom from Mideast Oil, which is a compendium of all the renewable energies and what's most cost effective, it's obvious that we've made great progress, and it's also obvious we're running out of time. And it's obvious that what we wrote then stood the test of time. So, for example, I started talking to people in 2007 about methane from the ocean. And we now know that's the biggest source of greenhouse gases that's killing us. We pioneered on permafrost when no one wanted to cover it. They didn't even cover it till 2 years ago, the IPCC. Same with ocean.
Mm-hmm.
We look further ahead because we're business people. Nobody can run a business that they don't have a good 3 to 5 year plan. And the really good ones have a 10-year plan. And when you look 10 years out on this plan, oh my goodness, you don't like what you see. So,
Yeah.
and I'd want to refer people, if they don't recall it, in that book that Vice President Gore did, An Inconvenient Truth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one graph in there called the hockey stick graph. Do you remember that? We talked about
Michael Mann's graph.
Yeah. Talks about the CO2 buildup. Well, if you look at that graph,
Yeah.
he was right. And that stick, we're on it now, which is why
Mm-hmm.
we're not getting slow increases in heat each year. We're getting huge increases in heat each year. You watch, for example, there's an issue this summer in both Paris and Rome about older people dying without air conditioning because it started to hit triple digits. That's not a rare thing anymore. And what we used to call a 1,000-year flood is now not even a 10-year flood anymore. It's like the flood that happened yesterday. So if we don't look at these signs, if we don't open ourselves to the data in a neutral way, you're going to get some really distorted answers. So what I always say to a businessman is take off your personal economic filter for a minute. Put that aside. We know you make money selling petroleum. Okay, put that aside. Now, just as a human being with a good mind trained in business, if I gave you this problem and I told you this is the source of it, what would you do as a businessman or woman? And the answer is pretty obvious. You don't want to destroy your markets. Nobody wins when your market floods and everybody loses their job and the town gets wiped out. But because of the inertia of capital formation and the political leverage it gives these companies, they don't ask that question. That's the problem. That is the problem.
Yep, true. Rinaldo, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we talked about on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Yeah, go to worldbusiness.org. It's the nonprofit. And if you click on, I think there's a place where you can put about, that has who we are. Click on my piece of that. And in all of my, not all, but up until 3 months ago, all my publications, it takes about, I don't know why it takes 3 months to get them up there, but it does. So all my publications, podcasts, all that's there. There's also an extensive biography on me and what I've done in the private sector as well as the public. It's sort of slanted towards the public sector, but it's got a lot of my private sector stuff in it. And it talks a little bit about the things I've innovated outside of the environment. Most people who know me know that I was one of the first co-founders of pay television in the world in 1972. And they also know I did some other things that were very, very breakthrough. I've got a lot of business skills, and I've been blessed with a lot of business success. But I also have been fortunate that when I've looked at things with a neutral filter, I see things that other people don't see, and then I have to put money into them. I remember 35 years ago telling some of my friends I was investing in this thing called organic food, and they thought it was crazy. I said, "Well, that's the Birkenstock crowd." And they said, "What is that? That's like a very small market. Why would you go to that?" I go, "I have a feeling that when people know what I know, more people are going to go for organic." So I got into organic food production years and years ago. 30 years ago. And I'm still on some organic companies to this day in my private side. And as you can imagine, they've been very lucrative.
Yeah.
Much better than buying Skippy peanut butter. So this neutral opinion of what's out there that business people are capable of is a great asset, and we need to stimulate that. So go to theworldbusiness.org. You'll see all the articles we published over the last 35 years. You'll see the books that we published. Take a look also at the fellows. It's an odd group. It's a group of people who have a wide variety of disciplines. So we span from extraordinarily impactful, famous university business professors. The recent former dean of Kellogg has been one of our fellows for a very long time. And we span that all the way to people who are looking at society and trying to redefine humanity in terms of quantum physics and Indian spirituality, and that's Deepak Chopra. And they have a tremendous amount to tell each other. And so what we do at the Academy is we take these mixtures, traditional business people, non-traditional thinkers, and we go, okay, how can we re-examine what we took as obvious? What we took as like, oh, that's just how it is. It's always been that way. Why would you question the grid? By the way, 2 papers that they really want to get, and if you have trouble finding them, send a note to Viviana, V-I-V-I, or admin at worldbusiness.org, either one. And there are two papers, one by a man named Lorenzo Christov, Kristov. So Dr. Christov was the head of California Independent System Operator for many years here in California. They operate the grid in California. And he was specifically the professor in charge of looking out at the future of the grid, 10 years out. And he published often with a friend of his over, a professor at Caltech. They put out an article on microgrids, which happened to agree exactly with what we were saying in the academy. So I wrote him. And I said, Professor Christoph, I got to tell you, I thought your article was fabulous, very technical. And he talked about creating a honeycomb of grids across California and how they would each support each other and you could eliminate high-powered lines. And he made the conclusion, as the head of the guy thinking 10 years in the future, there is no purpose in the grid anymore. It's outlived its usefulness. What we need to do is break it now down into microgrids. But there was one footnote there where he said the only thing we don't know how to solve is when you get a microgrid that's in isolation from all the microgrids. How do we port power to it? So I wrote him. I said, I think I got the solution. And I wrote a paper, short one. And it's fairly technical, but a layman can read it. And it says you use fuel cell supported microgrids. So if there's a fuel cell support on that isolated microgrid, it doesn't need high power wires. Well, he liked it so much that we now publish the two articles together as bookends. So he and I have come to the agreement years ago that if people are going to look at his solution for microgrids, they have to look at the necessity for fuel cell assisted support for microgrids. So those two papers that go out, and not that long, they were written technically, but if you don't get caught up too much in the electronics of the electric, you can work your way through it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super, Rinaldo. That's been fascinating. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.